All right, we are live on YouTube and live on Zoom.
Hello and good morning. Welcome. Welcome to the Summer 2021 K-12 Teaching Academy, hosted by Lurie College of Education here at San Jose State. Good morning, Benji. Good to have you back. Please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Before you hit send, go ahead and make sure that you have it addressed to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your good morning message. We are so happy to have you here. Good morning again, Armin. Glad to have you back. Good morning, Rachel. Good morning, Iverman and Cynthia. Glad to have you. All right, you'll hear me make this announcement a couple of times. Welcome to the Summer 2021 K-12 Teaching Academy. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a couple of moments, but before we do, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat and make sure that it is addressed to all panelists and attendees so that everyone in our webinar can see your message. Good morning, Lee and Diane and Bernadette. Glad to have you here. Good morning, Dawn. Glad to see you back again as well. And hi, Julia. Ooh, kindergarten. I also have a kindergartner starting this year. Good morning, Queen Lynn. Excellent. Ooh, I love it. Mandarin teacher. We have Spanish immersion students coming in here. I love it. Excellent. All right. And good morning, Sulakshna and Chris. Excellent. We're going to go ahead and get started with just a couple of quick announcements this morning as we still see a couple of attendees trickle in. Welcome everyone to the Summer 2021 K-12 Teaching Academy hosted by the Lurie College of Education here at San Jose State University. Just a quick reminder that this presentation will be recorded and available on our K-12 Academy website. So you can always go back and take a look at it if you would like to, and feel free to share with friends. If you are looking for captions today, it is right down at the bottom of your Zoom screen where it says live transcript. Go ahead and just click there. There will be captions on the recording as well. Just a quick reminder that this is a webinar, so your video and audio are automatically turned off, but please do use the chat to communicate with each other and with our presenter. And then just a quick little plug for our Facebook and LinkedIn group. The link right there is in the chat. Thank you, Brian. Just to keep track of all the amazing things that we have here at the Lurie College of Education. It's a great way to keep in the know about the different opportunities and presentations that we put on from time to time here at the college. So without further ado, our presentation today is called The Next Normal, Reimagining Next Year's Classroom. And our speaker today is Eric Cross, who is a 7th grade science teacher at the Albert Einstein Academies. And Eric, we are so excited to have you back again with us here at San Jose State in our Zoom space. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm excited to be here too. And welcome, teachers. I see so many California folks and Petaluma. Got a lot of love for Petaluma. I've done a few sessions for them out there. Santa Clara, all of my educators and people who do what's best on behalf of kids, no matter what space you occupy. Thanks for being here with us, and look forward to being with you for the next hour. All right, so we're all good to get started. I see myself big on the screen, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will blast off. There we go. Rebecca, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my... There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, as Rebecca said, my name's Eric Cross. I'm a middle school science teacher down here in San Diego, California. I teach at a school called Albert Einstein Academy Middle. I have 200 7th graders in the classroom, 36% class, 6 classes total. And when I don't teach the little ones, I teach the big ones at the University of San Diego. I'm an adjunct professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning. And then I consult and I get to do fun things like present and share some of the things that I'm doing in the classroom. A lot of the things that I'm talking about today are going to be things that are descriptive, not prescriptive. They're things that I've done based on my experience and with my opportunity to present with educators from across the country. Definitely encourage you to chew the meat and spit out the bones. Differentiating for K-12 and higher ed audience is a very difficult thing to do. So hopefully there's a few tools or ideas or inspiration that you can walk away with of things that you can do next school year, which is really a couple months away, or a month away for some of us, to re-envision the next normal. So education, for the most part, has been the same for the past 100 years. We're what's called a slow-moving industry. In San Jose and in Silicon Valley, we have a lot of fast-moving industries that change the face of what happens in our day-to-day life. For example, Uber and Lyft revolutionized what it meant to take a taxi somewhere. Yelp changed our perceptions of different restaurants and where we go. But in education, it hasn't really changed a lot in the last 100 years. It's been pretty similar, even though technology has increased. And ironically, it's also gotten more expensive as time has gone on. So in the previous normal, the regular normal, tech was optional. And there were some teachers who used it, but you can kind of get away without using it. Knowledge was hidden for the most part, and it was passed on through generations of people who possessed it. So there was this hidden knowledge. And if you had access to it, to this maybe social capital or knowledge or special information, you had a head start over others. A lot of education was based on memorization. That's what learning is be able to memorize facts. And no matter how many books or TED Talks come out, showing the difference between the knowledge that you memorize versus the skills you actually have to have in the real world, this system has kind of been pushed year after year after year, only to basically be neuralized by Agent J 2 weeks later when you try to give your students a unit review test or a midterm. Kind of everything gets deleted after that. For the most part, in the old normal, teachers and parents, the roles of families, they kind of were in obscurity. They wouldn't really know what was happening in the classroom. They were kind of left in the dark until maybe an open house or a parent-teacher conference where they actually find out what's going on. And purchases were made before the pedagogy and the curriculum actually existed. I'm looking at you, 3D printers. As awesome as they were, millions of dollars were spent on these, only to be sitting collecting dust in schools across the country and across the world, right next to a bunch of Darth Vader helmets and giant 3D squares. Not that the technology isn't good, but if we buy it, they will learn isn't always the best mantra. So this is how the normal was for the longest time. Now the new normal was us going from the horse and buggy age to the electric car. That's what I would describe the new normal as. And the new normal was what happened when we all went to quarantine and kind of distance teaching. And it left people asking, when we transitioned to this virtual world, where do we put the bridle or where do we put the saddle? And that definitely wasn't the right question to be asking. And if you did any kind of distance teaching, I'm going to put a trigger warning up right now, because I'm going to show you some memes of what it might have been like in the last year. Like when you're trying to make sure if your microphone was working, and your students would give you these kind of replies, which was really none at all. No one would say anything. Or you teach for 20 minutes before they tell you that your mic was muted. Or maybe your classroom was a little bit like some of mine, where you'd have all of your screens up, but you got the forehead, the ceiling fan, and then that one kid. Now, you know who that one kid is, right? He or she or they were in the class, and they were the ones that would always participate. And you would have to use your best, classroom management strategies to like redirect them and have them share the space. But you loved that kid on Zoom because they made sure that you weren't alone. So thanks, Josh. That was my student. So that one student was always there to kind of keep you company as you were looking at the blank screens. And our poor kindergartners, bless you teachers who were teaching K-2, and poor 5-year-olds that had to know how to email and read and send text messages and type as soon as they were logging in. So these are definitely things that many of us experienced when we were doing that distance teaching in the next normal. And then we tried to compress all of these things into virtual instruction. So homework, teacher expectations, attendance, student participation, culturally responsive teaching, SEL, assessments, all of that was to get forced into an hour session. And if you're familiar with the SAMR model, the SAMR model is how we look at education technology. So if you kind of see it as this progression or maybe a cycle, the S being substitution. So basically like Google Docs would substitute for typing. And then if you move all the way down to redefinition, that's when you're using technology to do things you never could have done before. So maybe now your kids are using iMovie to make documentaries to show their learning. And for us, for the most part, in the new normal, which was our distance teaching, most of that was substitution. It was really just taking everything we've been doing in the old normal and just shoving it into Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and Google Meet. And that's just autopsy without blame. That's not saying we did the best we could. We had to respond to an emergency situation. And for the most part, given the circumstances, we did a decent job. But there's definitely room for improvement. Now, we also somehow managed to figure out how to make major steps in closing the digital divide. This is something that we were working on for over a decade, but somehow a global pandemic forced us to be able to figure out how to get Chromebooks in the hands of so many students and Wi-Fi. This is something that we've been talking about forever. And then in a year, we managed to close that gap. So we were capable of doing things we never thought possible, or things that were bound by powers that were bigger than us, when we all came together for a common cause. Now, society got really difficult socially. So going back, remember that systemic racism and inequality were exposed yet again. This is nothing new. It just trended. These are things that we've known about that have been impacting us for millennia, for generations, but it reared its head again. In addition to that, we saw political polarization intensify as our students saw an event that hasn't happened since the inception of our country. And we had to walk them through this virtually, and it became extremely difficult. On top of that, we teachers were forced to pivot to online teaching in our homes. We started looking like the Matrix. We had our iPads up, we had our green screens, we had all these different things that were happening. And while we were all coping with our own loss and our own experiences simultaneously, so we were both trying to take care of the needs of our students while dealing with our own things ourselves. And we realized that for most of us, this was the scenario that we were living in, and we hung in there. And if you're here today, you stuck through it. And if you still decided to become a teacher and this is your first year, props to you for, despite seeing how difficult it was and surviving through all of that, still willing to get into the fight and do its best on behalf of kids. So much honor for that. So we thank you for being here. The mental emotional wellness of students and teachers declined, and the need for student services really became critical. And those tried and true methods of assessment were no longer accurate measures of students being able to learn in a Googleable environment. I heard so many ways of teachers trying to prevent students from cheating when they were online, and they can Google everything. And instead of asking the question, what if I designed ungoogleable assessments or assessments where they could use Google, they were trying to figure out ways to track their eyes using the camera to make sure that they weren't opening other tabs. And this caused a lot of education technology companies to thrive and their stocks to increase, because it was a lot easier to force compliance than it was apparently to redesign curriculum to provide more support for learning. Now, the role of families became even more important. We needed to rely on parents for accountability and support because we couldn't see our kids. And as the pandemic began to improve access across the country, we needed to do a wraparound support and have more frequent communication, especially when we were looking at all those different blank screens. So that's the old normal and the new normal. Now, before we get into the next normal, I want to ask this question. This is a participation question: is what is school for? And so what I'm going to do is drop a Jamboard in the chat. And what I'd like you to do is click on that. And in the first slide of the Jamboard, just go ahead and click right here on one of the stickies and then write down what is school for. Now, this is going to limit you to about, I think Jamboard's up to 36-ish people. So if you're not able to get in, that's okay. I'm going to leave this Jamboard up. But what is school for? Whatever you think school is for, just go ahead and click on one of these stickies on the left-hand side, and you can type it in and then it'll appear there. So go ahead and type that in and we'll take a second. All right, we have education, we have keeping track of kids for families, learning new things. And if you're in the recorded session and you're watching this asynchronously, you can go to the Jamboard by going to bit.ly/next normal jam. So for all my recorded folks or people watching this asynchronously again, you can go to that website and you'll have access to the Jamboard, and you can either contribute or you can see all the results that people typed. So prepare us for the future. Knowledge, cultivate kids. Schools for making friends. Thanks, Samuel. Awesome. I love it. And once you've done that, one thing, since we're already kind of wondering and dreaming here, go ahead and move on to the next one, which is at the very top. There's a right arrow you can click on. As you think about the next normal, as us going forward, what are some things we can leave behind from distance or remote learning practices in the next normal? What are some things that we can leave behind that you think? So in this experience that you have as you reflected on it in the last year, what are some things that we can abandon or leave behind that we don't want to bring forward into the new normal? So go ahead and create a sticky note for the second Jamboard. So if you go up to the top and you click the right arrow, just go ahead and drop in a sticky there as well. Parents doing work for kids, Zoom, kids not responding with the cameras off, passive learning, lack of participation, in front of the computer all the time. Sometimes it was even 2 devices or 3 devices, right? In front of the computer, had the phone, the iPad up, Xbox in the background with Fortnite. Only the teacher speaking. Thank you for so much for contributing to the Jamboard. you always never know. And this is always feels so good to see. Now, our last one, what can we carry forward from our distance learning once we enter the next normal? And this pause for reflection is for us. Some of us have a lot of like residual feelings from what happened, but let's pause and think about what are some things that we can learn or that we can take away from that moment, from that year plus for some of us of distance learning, remote teaching, that we can bring forward that were positives, things that we want to keep into our next normal. In the chat, I see helping students become resilient, active, and passionate people who care about making a better world. Awesome. Knowing that kids are more capable using Google Classroom, it'll be easier to transition to fifth graders to the new platform. Mindfulness, accessibility, and creativity. Open note testing, research-based learning, multiple ways of showing learning, active parent involvement. One of the things that I'm seeing in a lot of this is that there was a lot of good that was gleaned from that experience. And in this moment, I think it's important to reflect and grab that, because we can get overwhelmed by the memories of kind of the pain and trauma that we experienced. And if we don't stop and pause and allow our teachers and our students and leaders to reflect on the good, we'll forget when we go back into the next normal. And so these are all phenomenal ideas. And this is going to stay active and live, so you can always go back and refer to it or use it with your teachers or your team when you do that PD, when you give moments for people to pause and think about what are the things that we want to bring forward into the new school year, because we can't go back to normal at this point. All right, so at this point, I'm going to show a short clip by Seth Godin. He has a phenomenal TED Talk, and he did a number of interviews. And then this short interview, he talks about the difference between learning and education. So I'm going to go ahead and play that.
Intentional action. What is school for? Education is not the same as learning. Education is about compliance and a certificate. It's about accreditation. We know what school is for. School was invented, public school, was invented to create compliant factory workers for the growing industrial economy. That's why it exists. And it is organized the way it is organized, a lot like a factory, for a reason. We process you for a year. If you're defective, we put you back and we reprocess you, right? You go through this whole assembly line thing, and on and on and on. So famous colleges, which are not the same as good colleges, are the last period in that sentence. Because if a parent does a good job, their status in the community, their kid will comply well enough to get into a famous college, and then the parent has succeeded. The famous college is the signal to various elements of the industrial economy that you know how to comply at the highest level, and that you were born probably with privilege, and so therefore you're one of us, and then you get slotted in. This has nothing to do with learning. And all of the evidence makes this really clear. That learning, kids who know how to walk, ride a bike, talk, juggle, go down the list, they learned it. That if you want someone, for example, to like Indian food, what you don't do is have them read the history of Indian food and then have them take the Indian food test. And if they do well, let them take a course in Indian food and then take them to the restaurant. That's not how it works, right? The way it works is you start eating it when you're a kid, you learn a little bit about it, you make it, it reminds you of certain things, and on and on and on. Well, most of the work that matters cannot be done by an AI. It cannot be easily outsourced to someone cheaper than you. It's not work we know how to teach in an educational setting. It just isn't. That it's the soft skills, which I call real skills, that transform people. It's the choice to be optimistic, enthusiastic, punctual, hardworking, creative. These are choices They become skills, and you can learn them, but we don't educate people on them. So then well-meaning parents say, well, I want to educate my kids, but when the kid comes home with an A, we congratulate them, and when they come home with a D, we say, you did something wrong. What are we doing? We're sending them really clear signals about what actually matters. Instead of saying, you didn't look me in the eye, you didn't shake that person's hand, you didn't do that generous thing in this situation. Or instead of saying, wow, I just saw that thing you drew. That's amazing. How do we expand that? How do we create an environment where you're editing Wikipedia pages when you're 7 years old? Why not? No one can stop you. How do we make it so that you're organizing a fundraiser for the community when you're 9? No one can stop you. These acts, that's what I think of as learning.
All right. So
Yes.
Seth gives us this perspective on learning and education. And in education, he talks about, he kind of views it when he defines his terms as kind of compliance. You're going through all these steps to ultimately get a certificate, which has a brand on it. The higher your brand, it shows in society that you're doing really well. And then learning is something different. It's a different type of skill development. And in our Jamboard, when I was looking at some of the responses is, what is school for? I'm seeing learning, and a lot of the things that I'm seeing in here also have to do with developing soft skills. But this is one of the elements that is probably we're very anemic in general when I talk about education as a whole. And again, this is autopsy without blame. So this is just looking at where do we have deficiencies so that we can make improvements. I love being a teacher. It's one of my favorite things. And when you love something, you don't just see it through rose-colored glasses. You see both the good and the areas for improvement. And we need to be able to talk honestly about both. And this quote by Jamie Cassip really resonates with me. As you start thinking about working with kids, and it says, instead of asking kids what they want to be when they grow up, we ask, what problems do they want to solve? And this changes the conversation from who do I want to work for to what do I need to be able to learn in order to be able to do that. And the beautiful thing about this quote is the problem that you want to solve can be anything from climate change to ensuring that your parents can pay for their medical bills when they get older. So what if we started with asking our students that question? And you can ask that question to a 6-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 20-year-old, or a 50-year-old. And for myself, I asked that question, do my students know the answer for me? If we asked about Tesla, do you know what problem they want to solve? Probably. They want to bring out electric cars and get people to Mars. What about Uber and Lyft? What do they want to do? Most of us can articulate the problems that people want to solve, or major companies they want to solve, by looking at their product. But are we able to articulate the problem that we want to solve? And are we able to help our students be able to articulate the problem they want to solve? See, when you start with why, Simon Sinek talks about this. When you start with the why, now you have the foundation for the motivation to make change and to learn new things. So where do we go from here in the next normal? So what I'm going to offer and suggest is going to be a compass and not a map. These ideas, I think, help point us in the right direction. They are not exhaustive and they are not comprehensive. We can't cover all of those things in an hour. And I was just talking with Rebecca a little earlier. As I've been working on this presentation over the past several weeks, I've realized that it's kind of built out into something that's almost like a seminar now versus just a 1-hour talk. And so I've honed this down to kind of two kind of key areas, but this is something where your job is going to be the cartographer. You're going to be the map maker. My job is going to help simply point us in the right direction. You are going to map it for your community, your classroom, your organization. Now, warning is like, once you let the genie out of the bottle, you can't put him back in. So now that we know what school can be and what learning is, how do we embrace the best elements of it? And I think it starts with what we've been talking about, social emotional learning. That's one of the big parts. And so as we look at industry, social emotional learning skills, soft skills, Google in 2008 did a project called Project Oxygen. And what they did is they looked at the analytics of what made a great manager. They were trying to figure out what were the characteristics of a great manager on our teams. Google, multinational, multi-billion-dollar organization. We don't even say search the web. We just say Google things, right? Like that's how big they are, massive. And here's what they found, and it's super interesting. 7 of the top 8 skill sets are soft skills. You didn't get into a STEM or technical skill until they got to number 8, which means that what they value and what they found in their top managers were things that had to do with their ability to work with other people, being a good coach, being able to empower a team and not micromanage, being able to provide inclusivity, being able to help people focus on a goal and communicate, help people build capacity and have a vision for where you want to take them. Now, number 8 is when the technical skill kicked in. So I thought that was really instructive. Yet this isn't necessarily something that we talk about or teach students explicitly in K-12. And many students learn these skills through their families or through their spheres of influence, which brings up some equity questions. Because if your family is not doesn't have the ability or doesn't have access to certain skill sets that help you build networks and relationships and those types of things in the environment, you're going to be at a disadvantage even if you get the best grades. Now, they did this project again in 2016. This time it was called Project Aristotle. And instead of looking at a good manager, what they looked at is what makes a great team. And the results that they found were very similar. Number 1 was a team had psychological safety. They were dependable. Their structure and clarity, everybody knew their roles and people knew their strengths and weaknesses, which requires vulnerability on both sides. See, it's one thing we think of vulnerability when we think about like you knowing my weaknesses. But vulnerability is also you knowing my strengths so that you know when you can lean on me and when I can lean on you. There was also some kind of meaning in the project and the work that they were doing. They knew their why and they believed that their work was actually creating change. And so that's kind of the 30,000 foot view. We know that large companies and businesses value these soft skills in addition to these technical skills that we're teaching students. So how do we implement some of these things at a more macro or micro level? First, I think is making connections. The National Equity Project has this great, what they call cultural synchronization questions. And I've been doing this with my students for years, but I've actually iterated on it. And I'd like to share you both versions. And I've made them into a Google form that you can copy and make for your students. So let me show you my student version, and then let me show you the National Equity Project version, and you'll have access to both. You can make a copy, remix it, and then use it with your students. So the first version is my own, and I've been using this since I became a teacher. I'm beginning my eighth year next year. As a career educator, I've been working with students for quite some time. But in the actual professional classroom, 8 years will be the next year. So I start with first name, last name, what class period. All my classes are named after animals and insects that make a noise. Some of these you'll notice don't make a noise or they're extinct. And that's how I know which classes are my unique classes, because they voted on an animal that didn't make a noise. And that was the only rule. So very beginning of the year, I know what my differentiation strategy is going to be. Then I ask my students, do they have a nickname? Do they have access to technology? Who do you live with? What are the adults in your household? What's your living situation like? And then I get into some of these more soft questions. What's your favorite YouTube channel? What makes you smile no matter what? What are you really good at? It's the best compliment you can receive. I give this the first week of school. And then in the end, I have a spreadsheet of all of their responses. Now, recently, the National Equity Project put out a similar set of questions. And you'll be able to make a copy of these. Now, I would not recommend using all of the questions because there's a lot. But what this does is it helps you align with the cultural backgrounds of your students by asking these really kind of pointed questions that allow them to expand on who they are. So what kind of activities or traditions do you do with your family? Are there any special meals that you have? What are your favorite songs? Do you have any special traditions? Do you play games? What do you read? When was the last time you felt listened to? Who was a teacher that helped you feel successful? Who was a teacher that made you feel like you weren't successful? And what did they do to cause you to feel that way? Imagine you had all of this information in the first week of school. How would that inform how you teach the students in front of you? For so many of us, especially for me, when I have 200 kids, like I don't learn this information until way late in the school year, if ever. It takes so long. And before I give out this information, before I ask these questions, I share this information with my students because I never ask them to be vulnerable unless Mr. Cross has gone first. So I always go first and share questions and answers about who I am as a person before I ask them to share about themselves. So both of these I've put into Google Forms. And if you have access to the slides, and we'll drop those in the chat, you'll go to this slide and be able to click on it. And then you can remix this to your heart's delight and share it with your students and collect that information. So imagine starting the school year off this way. Next is building virtual communities. Now, teachers, I know there's so much for us to do. By no means feel like you need to take on everything that I'm sharing. These are just ideas and things that I've implemented. So many of you are already doing great work. So if this feels like another thing, it may not be something that you want to engage in, but for some of you, it's really going to resonate. So one of the things that I did is I built a virtual community for my students. And I realized that when I was doing Zoom teaching, the thing that they were missing most was a social interaction. It was exactly what you all said in the Jamboard. If we go back to that Jamboard again, so many people wrote socialization, making friends, building relationships, but they weren't getting that in distance teaching. And my students try to do it. And I teach 12 and 13-year-olds that are that skinny part of the hourglass between being a child like 6th grade and then being a teenager like, 14, high school. They're like going through that awkward phase, going through puberty. And so they create community, but it's very much like Lord of the Flies community. It's not like, let's all live together and have fun community. So it's my job to be the thermostat, not the thermometer. I need to create that culture. So what I've been using is actually, I used my YouTube channel. I created a YouTube channel, and all of my direct instruction over the last year, I've been recording just in 2 to 5 minute segments. Now I have 111 videos that I've been pre-recording that I'm going to be using going forward. And these are just pre-recorded videos of the direct instruction segments. So again, this is a 2-minute video where I'm explaining something. I'm not doing this large production. I'm not doing, all kinds of cool edits and fly-ins. This is just when Mr. Cross needs to talk about metabolism. So when Mr. Cross needs to talk about predator and prey relationships, because you know what? I'm going to say it 6 times in a day anyways. What if I record it so my students had access to it 24/7? And then what if I banked that so that they were always on YouTube? Now they're able to watch those as often as they'd like. Next, we created a Discord channel. Now, if you're not familiar with Discord, adults, grown folks, those of you who've been in industry, think Slack, but for kids. So Discord is where a lot of our students are building community and where they're finding their learning. I'm part of, I think, 31 Discord communities. So it's a place where you can do a group chat, you can share information, you can do emojis and memes, you can create separate communities. I have a Discord for every year of students that I've taught. So now I've been able to make Discords, and each group of my students, they're classified by different years. Now, if you're not familiar with Discord and you teach students that are maybe older than like 9 or 10, ask one of your students in the class about Discord and ask them to teach you. Their eyes will light up and they will get so excited. And yes, many people use it for gaming. And Patrice, great question as far as the district to approve it. So every district is a little bit different. One other way that you can do it is many students are already on Discord. And so having them teach you or having students lead it themselves, they're creating that community. And so if it's something that, maybe not be something you're able to officially do, it might be something that you can take some student leaders and have them be able to create outside of class. Yeah. So what did Don say? My 6th graders made a class Discord so they can talk to each other outside of class. Yeah. So maybe have students do it that way. Take some student leaders and then you can kind of coach them on how to become moderators. In my Discord, one of them looks like this. And so there's a student lobby, and they all have kind of different names. We created a Google form where we had to verify who you were before you could be entered in. We have different channels on the left-hand side based on interest. And then here, this is after we were done with school. Students that didn't have relationships with each other, these were my on-campus students. So I had about 16 total. It was a very small class. They were connecting with each other and doing trips to Aquatica and planning things. These are students who did not belong to the same social group if we were in a totally normal class environment, but they formed connections because they had a place to bond. And if you're not familiar with how big Discord is, Microsoft just tried to buy them for, I think, 1.6 million. The deal didn't go through. So this is where many of our kids are. If you have Minecraft kids, they know about it. But slowly, and if you're kind of intimidated by it, it's okay. find that student in class and say, who knows about Discord? Can you teach me about it? That's what I did. And some of those students now, they're all moderators and they created rules and all kinds of great things. So it's been a lot of fun. As far as online cyberbullying, that's one of the things that we were very intentional about. And the great thing about Discord is you can use that as a platform to teach digital citizenship. And so you can have moderators, you can create rules, you can let students make their own names, but make sure that you can verify who each person is. There's all kinds. It's similar to what you would kind of do in a normal school environment. You just transfer it digitally. So there's a lot of safeguards that are built in there. But I would highly recommend, even if you don't do it for school, do it yourself. Join a gaming community and kind of see what the features are. And then it'll kind of make more sense to transfer over. There is definitely kind of a little bit of a learning curve, not a technical one, but more of a social one, and learning how it works online. And we have some great, thank you for participating in the chat. Looks like a lot of you already have some background experience with this, which is awesome. Let's see, many of the kids wanted to teach me how to use Discord. Yeah, I was the same way. Then trade instructions. And again, you're creating a community there, or your students are creating a community and you're kind of helping support them, because what we need to do is give them authentic experiences where they can practice working out these social muscles. See, a group project where they're designing a diorama about something, yes, you can learn certain skill sets, but typically it comes down to one kid who does all the work, one kid who doesn't. This kid wants to socialize with so-and-so, and you're trying to rotate and facilitate all of this. But this is a place where they're organically forming connections about interest. It doesn't feel like work, it's learning. So it's because it's passionate, it's artistic, it's interesting, it's their topics. They get to promote their YouTube channels, which are incredible. I have so many Lego YouTube channels that my students make, and you get to connect with them with things that don't have to do with your content. And guess what? That relationship, that deposit that you make transfers to when you're doing academic instruction. So when you are making those deposits and you're creating that community, all of a sudden now you're not leading because of authority, you're leading because of influence. You're leading because you've created value, because you've built a community, because you've built relationships. And this is one of the ways that our students and adults are doing it, is through Discord. Next up is another tool called Kumo Spaces. We'll demonstrate this here. It's something that came out a little bit later. I think it's a lot of fun. I wish it had features that were implemented in Zoom, but let me go ahead and demonstrate how it works. And it's completely free. They have a privacy policy that you can go in that talks about the information that they collect before you maybe present it to your district. But the way Kumo Space works, you go in, you create an account, and then you'll create a room. And here's where it's fun for online learning. Now it's limited to 30 people per room, but when I click on the room, there I am right there at the bottom. And that circle that's around me, that's people who can hear me. That's how close they need to be in proximity. So if you're not in my circle, then you're not going to be able to hear me. Now, as the moderator, I can control a number of different settings. I'm going to drop this in the chat real quick. If you want to join my Kumo Space, you can. Now in Kumo Space, I can make all kinds of different sections of my room. So this is my map. I have a Spotify jukebox where I can play music. I even have a YouTube channel where if you get close to it,
at home with my mom.
I have Prince EA's video, What is School For? That's playing there.
They did teach me some important
As I move away from it,
like factoring trinomials.
Notice the sound goes away. And if I want to do group work, I can go to this table and sit with other students. And as long as we're all in the same proximity, we can hear each other. Now, as the teacher, I can supervise, I can add students, I can remove students, I can make co-hosts in there. But now I can actually have breakout rooms, but I'm able to see everyone, and I can broadcast a message in here. I can even screen share and share a screen with everybody so they can all see what I'm doing. Was this designed for distance learning? Was this designed for education classroom? No, but neither was Zoom. We co-opted all of these different private sector companies and industries and technologies, and we used it for education because that's what we do as teachers. We remix, we hack, and we change things to engage our kids and promote deeper learning. And so Kumo Space is a really fun way to be able to do this. I'm hearing people push the doorbell. Let's see if somebody's in here, if I can find you. All right, I see Don. Hey, Don. Don, can you hear me?
Hey.
Or Yeah, Don, you can hear me. Hey, Denise.
Yeah, Don, you can hear me. Hey, Denise. Yeah, Don, you can hear me. Hey, Denise. Yeah, Don, you can hear me. Hey, Denise. Yeah, Don, you can hear me. Hey, Denise.
All right. So you can see us interacting with each other in there. And so this is Kumo Space, a lot of fun. Again, completely free. I created this room called The Next Normal because it's kind of flying under the radar right now. There's a lot of room names that you can get. Maybe try to get your classroom and see if you can use that and have it be your own Kumo Space. So lots of fun things on here. Being able to broadcast again. Looks like we have Dawn, Jackie, Denise, all in here hanging out. Oh, one more just joined. Lee just joined. There we go. So we'll let you go ahead and explore that. Next is PowerPoint. So we're thinking about, so yes, I said PowerPoint. And this is where my students go, Mr. Cross, are you a boomer? Yeah, so PowerPoint has a feature that is underutilized, I think. And I've talked about this before, but this is a different one. So what I need you to do you have your devices, your phones? Could you take out your phone for me and open the camera? I teach at a school, we're German immersion, K through 5, and then we are German or Spanish in middle school, and then ultimately the high school that we're building. My students, I serve a variety of populations and languages at my school, and it's a beautiful thing. But I'm still trying to get English right. But I still want to be able to build relationships and connections with my parents. Here's a tool that's built into Microsoft PowerPoint that's extremely valuable. And it's free for educators. So when I convert my slides to PowerPoint, I have an option. Oh, let me go ahead and I'm going to close out of my Kumo space real quick. There we go. I have an option to present live. So I'm going to click present live and make sure anyone can see it. And then once I hit present, what it does is give you a QR code. Can you scan that for me? So go ahead and take your phone, turn on the camera, and just point your camera at the QR code. And then you'll see a little website pop up. Go ahead and tap that. And if you don't have access or you're going to get it late, I'm going to drop the link to it in the chat. This is what I want you to see. And then I want you to see how could we use this to connect and build community with our families. And I want you to think about the families that you've been trying to reach, but have had trouble doing. So I'm going to show my slides. And here are my slides. What I want you to do, see where it says English in the bottom left-hand corner? Can you tap on that and change the language? And as you change the language, what do you notice happening? Can you tell me in the chat? So go ahead and click right down here in the bottom left-hand side where it says English and just change it, maybe to a language that you know. Yeah, I'm on English and I'm working on my Spanish, but go ahead and change that. What do you notice happening? Yeah, Lee, the subtitles are in a new language. So what if you were able to do a parent-teacher conference, or what if you were able to present and you had this activated for your parents that were also listening? How many different families and parents would you be able to reach if they were able to read what you were saying in their mother tongue? As I'm speaking, it's doing live translation. Now, right now, it's only text. It doesn't do audio yet, but it's free-ish. It doesn't cost you anything monetarily. And if you're an educator and you have a school account, you get Microsoft Office 365, you can get it for free. So it doesn't cost you anything. So this is one additional way to be able to create some equity and connect with families and build some community, is by using a tool like this. All right, let me go ahead and back out. So Lee, to get the QR code, what I did in my presentation, if you go to present live, which is from beginning, current slide, present live, make sure also the audience is for anyone. Otherwise, they're going to have to log in. It's kind of like in Google Slides when it says restricted. Make that for anyone and then click present live and it'll give you the QR code once you do it the first time. Otherwise, you have to reset it. Prema, it'll be in the slides. The link to everything that I share with you will be in my slides, and they'll all be in the presenter notes in the slides. So if you just go to the presenter notes, every link will be in there. And then if there's anything I left out, you can feel free to contact me. But the whole slideshow will have links to everything on there. Yeah, of course. So in addition to the virtual community, and this is something that can be done concurrently, no matter what your next normal is like, these are all things that can be done. But building the physical school community. So it's just some ideas that we had going forward next year, remembering that relationships revolve around communities. And most cultures build relationships through food. And I've always wondered why we do parent-teacher conferences or we do get-togethers, but we aren't doing meals. We aren't breaking bread together. And schools more and more are becoming these social institutions that are so much more than just content knowledge, especially as content knowledge, becomes more digital. We're talking about soft skills. We're talking about building relationships. We're talking about this wraparound approach. Let's solve a need that a lot of families have, like having dinner. What if we hosted a dinner together? That's a Costco run and one night. And we sit down and we break bread and you meet teachers and you just connect and bond. Your next parent-teacher phone call or email or check-in for a student is going to be very different if you've already broken bread together. It seems like a simple thing, but it's a big thing that doesn't really get done very often. Or gaming night. Next year, we're bringing back at our school, we're going to bring back LAN parties. If you're not familiar with this, all those projectors that all those schools spent billions of dollars on, those smart boards, those Promethean boards, we're going to use them for more than just showing YouTube videos and Google Slides. Nothing wrong with YouTube videos and Google Slides, but if you just spent $3,000 on a projector and you're just using it for slides, it's like using a Ferrari to just get the mail. So we're going to use those. We're going to have kids bring their gaming systems. They're going to plug them in and we're going to do like a lock-in at night, or we're going to do like half day. In the second half of the day, we're going to play because that's where we build community. Now, what's the long-term strategy of this? The more my kids are connected, the deeper learning can go. And we are not one-dimensional people. Teachers, this. We don't quit organizations. We quit people often when we leave our job. Many of us have left a job not because of what the job was trying to do, but because of the people or the leadership or the teams that we worked in. It just wasn't creating value for us. Kids are no different. When we feel connected and we feel like we're part of something bigger than us, we'll work harder, work longer, put in more effort, and stretch our thinking a lot more. And these are the ways that we do this. Now, this doesn't get covered in your teacher induction program. We don't talk about this because it's, there's so many other things to talk about, but these are things that are super valuable. And I really found that my students really craved it. We were doing things on Friday after school. Kahoot, Gym Kit, Jackbox. If you're not familiar with Jackbox, it's online, like an online board game that's a ton of fun. Playing Among Us. These are not things that I necessarily enjoy doing on my own. Eric Cross did not want to go and play Kahoot or Among Us after school on his own. It wasn't how I was going to spend my time. But you know what? It builds relationships with my kids. I care about that. It helps provide deeper learning. I care about that. It brought out voices who wouldn't necessarily speak when we talked about academics. It turned on video cameras of students who wouldn't even come to normal sessions. I saw students come to the game night who didn't come to class. Now, it put me in an interesting situation, right? But I was just happy to see them. And because of that, I started building a connection. And because of that, they were able to start coming online and being more productive and being more active as part of the class. It was amazing. Carrying this a little further. So we build community locally. What if we expanded our influence and our connections beyond our local community? We started connecting with people around the globe. Flipgrid has a tool built in for this. So you can partner with classes around the world. And this is one of the things, the unintended consequences of the global pandemic is that countries around the world were impacted. Everyone had to figure out how to get digital. Well, now those devices are in the hands of students everywhere. I was in Pakistan last year doing some teacher PD out there. Kids have computers. There are people in rural parts of the country who didn't have access, and now they do. Have we solved the problem completely? Absolutely not. But have we made great strides? We have. And so if you go on Flipgrid, you can go to and do something called Grid Pals. You can look at the map and you can click on one of the pluses and you can find an educator almost in, internet. I mean, almost everywhere in the world, not every single place, but in a lot of places, and you could form a connection. What if you did not just interdisciplinary, but inter-country, intercontinental activities together? Now you're not just building community locally, but you're building community globally. And if there's ever a time that we could be able to do this, now is the time. to be able to do it. And Flipgrid's completely free. Kids can have videos back and forth. You can connect with another English teacher. You can filter if you want to do elementary. And if you want to connect on American Sign Language, if you want to connect on engineering, and then you can click on one of the links and you can form a relationship with that teacher. Incredibly, incredibly powerful tool that's built in there. All right, last is teacher wellness and self-care. So I talked about social emotional learning. I really only want to focus on two things, social emotional learning and teacher wellness and self-care. And again, many of these things are going to be anecdotal. They're going to be things that I've picked up from my own teaching experience or from people that I respect and admire who teach and consult and present across the country. So the reimagineschools.org website showed some interesting statistics. It said 77% of educators, teachers, found that teaching was very challenging, which I don't think is a new statistic. They were working on average 8 hours more per week. They were experiencing secondary trauma and stress. Teacher retirements are on the rise, especially in California. We're seeing a huge rise in teacher retirements, and fewer students are pursuing careers in teaching out of college. We already had a massive teacher shortage, but we're seeing more and more of it. So one of the things that create a lot of value for me is engaging in a community of practice. I didn't know what this was before a year ago. I had no idea. And you all might know this already, but if you don't, stay with me. So community practice is a group of educators who get around on a common interest and with an objective and a purpose, and they meet monthly or weekly or bi-weekly. I connected with a group of educators that wanted to focus on anti-racist, anti-bias work. We met weekly, or we met monthly. We met once a month. And it was one of the most powerful, not only professional development, but also soul-fulfilling experiences, because I was connected with these other like-minded educators. And because we were all on Zoom, it was an opportunity for us to all connect conveniently and pour out our cup and share these similar experiences. The isolation, and this was written about in the Jamboard. Some of you wrote about the isolation. What can we abandon? And isolation right here in blue was one of them. We were also isolated. And sometimes our community is not people that we're in the same room with geographically. And what we focused on was producing something that I thought created a lot of value. So we all got together and we ended up building this website. And it's community of practice and our shared resources. And those are the educators there. This is our team that we met together. And I have to give a shout out to Desiree Whitmore, who helped organize this. She's at the Exploratorium. And if you watch my Decolonizing STEM, you would have seen her there. But she was one of the ones that created the culture and brought us together. And as we met monthly, we continued to discuss the challenges and the opportunities and the resources that we can use and share that would help bring more equity into STEM teaching, not just STEM teaching, but teaching in any classroom. And we created this spreadsheet to share with other teachers. And this spreadsheet has vetted lessons, documents, resources, podcasts that you can use if this is something that you're growing. So not only did we connect monthly and we built a community, but we also produced something that we were proud of. And this is a link that's going to be in the slides. And if you're a STEM teacher or you're a teacher interested in doing more equity or anti-racist, anti-bias work, feel free to grab any of these resources. You don't need to source them. We just condense them into one place so that we can share with other teachers who are trying to do this good work. Next, I also want to focus or share or promote an upcoming event. There are some other sessions that San Jose is doing on specifically on wellness, and they are extensive and they give a lot of different strategies. And I don't always promote things, but there are at least 4 people that I deeply respect and admire that are going to be speaking at this event. And it's on July 21st and July 22nd. They're Wellbeing, Equity, and Recovery Summit. There are breakout sessions, sel-summit.com. Highly recommend checking it out. It's this intersection between social emotional learning, equity, and inclusion. The speakers are speakers that I respect not only as people, but also as educators. One of the byproducts of this movement into social emotional learning is there's also a lot of companies that are springing up that are all saying that they specialize in it. And as an educator, it's really tough to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff and figure out, okay, who's going to create value for me, who's going to be worth my time, and who's just kind of trying to get the money from the schools. This is an organization that is legitimate, that I would highly recommend being a part of. I will be watching as a participant, just trying to glean and learn from these people that are there. So the link will be in the slides. It's going to be an incredibly powerful event. And then last, I have 3 minutes left. So I debated on sharing this one because it's probably the most kind of raw. And the reason why I'm sharing it is because I've been a product of people who are great mentors, who are honest with me. And one of the biggest issues that I've seen is that there are these hidden rules or things that don't get discussed or don't get talked about that are really important for teachers to know, especially teachers of color, because many of us end up with imposter syndrome. We experience success, but we don't feel like we deserve it, or that we earned it, or that we belong there. And we devalue the work that we do. And it's not just people of color, educators in general. We feel like this. And so these are some things that I've learned along the way. And I share this with my grad students. So I want to share it with you. Now, many of you are veteran educators. You know a lot of these different things. But if you're a new teacher, these are things that I've learned along the way. And so one, having a web presence, being networked, LinkedIn, social media is important. Making your teacher your brand. Being a teacherpreneur, which means being more than just your content. The things that you do are amazing. Document it. Use Google Photos. Use blog about it. Create a Twitter account. Document the work that you're doing. It's super important to be able to do that, to have a record of your work. Next, use up your personal days. You get them, use them. I'm talking to myself in this one because I've used 0 in my career as an educator because I used to pride myself on never being absent. And I've realized that that isn't the best thing to do for my own mental health. I'm one of those people who say yes to everything. And I'm realizing that if I want to stay in this for the long term, I need to be able to find balance in this. Next, set boundaries. The need in the work will never end. You need to recharge. If you are a bright, shining star that's going to burn out in 5 years, we need you to be able to stay in this. And so realize there's never going to be a lack of students who need you. There's never going to be a lack of parents that you can connect with. There's never going to be a lack of opportunities to teach, but you have to realize that you're human. And if you can stay in it longer and you can recharge, you can help more kids in the long run. So you want to think about this as a marathon, not a sprint. Next, wellness practices aren't a long-term solution in dysfunctional settings. If you're in an environment, a teaching environment that's dysfunctional, no amount of self-care, meditation, essential oils, going for walks, doing headspace activities is going to help. Like you got to get out. You got to be honest with yourselves. Some of us are in phenomenal organizations with great leaders. Some of us are not. It's toxic. And it is not healthy to try to do these self-care practices in toxic environments. We know this from relationships, right? If you're in a relationship that's abusive, you going home and doing self-care is not a solution to the situation. If you're in a situation that is not healthy for you as an educator, for your own mental health, you want to consider maybe moving out of that situation and finding a place where you will be able to be supported. It's more than just about a paycheck. Hiring professional therapists for your team can do wonders for creating culture. 3 years ago, I brought in a professional therapist to help my team go through the book, So You Want to Talk About Race, because I knew we needed to talk about it, but I couldn't talk about it as a person of color because I couldn't be objective while being triggered as my entire white staff of teachers were working through their process, which they needed to do. And they're amazing teachers who love kids, but we all have biases. And in this one, we were working through a particular bias that had to do with culture and ethnicity. I have bias. I'm a cisgender, biracial, straight male. Like I have biases. We all have them. Again, autopsy without blame, but we needed to work on the ones that directly impacted our students at that moment in time. I also have experiences with racism in my past. And so we brought in a professional therapist once a month who was able to facilitate these conversations and let us pour out the cup. It was so powerful, and I can't understand why it's not being done more often. She would come in, she would just facilitate conversation for us. She would empathize with our own struggles as an educator, and then she would go, and at the end, our cup was emptied so that we were able to be filled by a lot of the things our kids were going through. If teachers are going to be asked to do the work of therapists and social workers and counselors, Teachers also need to be able to have the resources to do the self-care that therapists, counselors, and social workers have. If you're a counselor, you see other counselors. If you're a therapist, you see other therapists. Many of this work and practice is very, very similar. So it's important to make sure that you're doing that yourself. And I'll be honest with you, like I had to work on my own destigmatizing of mental health. I had to work through that myself and realize that my own vulnerability and my own toughness and suck it up and all that kind of stuff wasn't ultimately, at the end of the day, wasn't helping anybody. Not my family, not myself, not my students. I've never used the word cute so many times as I have in the last 3 years. That's like a huge milestone for me. And it's because I've worked through my own perceptions of what I thought it was to be strong and tough and masculinity and all those different things. And so there's a small glimpse of my own transparency for you. Last but not least, avoid grind culture, perpetuating teacher martyrdom. You know what? If you're seeing memes on there about, hey, we get paid and, you know, building bridges and helping things, yes, we do. But at the end of the day, California ain't cheap. And you want to talk about teacher wellness? One of the number one stressors is finances. So if we can take care of our teachers at home and making sure that they're earning an income where they can at least survive and not be at the poverty line, that's going to do wonders for wellness. Love Starbucks cards, love handwritten cards at the end of the year. It fills my soul. But we got bills to pay. I've had a number of teachers that were friends of mine that were phenomenal in the classroom that went to the private sector because they make twice as much. And if we want to continue having the brain drain, if we don't want to continue recruiting and attracting people who are underrepresented as STEM or as teachers, not just STEM teachers, but as teachers in general in California, we have to be more attractional for them. Biden said yesterday, teachers deserve a raise, not praise, or a couple days ago. All right, that's good. Now let's act on it. And it's not just about pay, it's about compensation. And so making sure that you know your worth and that you're getting, you're receiving the value that you provide. That's important to know. You create value. Celebrate that, advertise it, remind yourself of that, remind other teachers of that. It's so, so important. Bill Gates said that people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but they underestimate what they can do in 5 years. He actually said 10, but I think 5. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Set some realistic goals for yourself. Pick one of these things for the next normal, or think of your own next normal as we go forward and grow from there. This last quote, it says, it's our hope that educators will take the role of the alchemist and develop, refine, purify, and perfect the educational system to achieve a learning ecosystem that works for anyone. So, or everyone. We're alchemists. We turn something that doesn't have a ton of value, we turn stale knowledge and we transform it into something that can open doors and open pathways for people. And so I hope one of these tools or one of these strategies will be helpful for you. Thank you for staying. I appreciate it. Rebecca, Brian, Dr. Latimer, the whole team at San Jose, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share. Teachers, I wish you a great next normal.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was absolutely inspiring. And I love like all the comments popping in after that. Yes, thank you so much for being with us. And don't worry, everyone, the time isn't up yet. So I know Brian's going to pop in the chat again, the link for the discussion room. We're going to transition to a normal Zoom room. You'll have access to your camera and your mic, and we will start what I can only imagine is going to be an amazing conversation given what we were just able to look at here. So thank you again. Eric, you did a wonderful job today. And I mean, I'm just sitting here taking notes. So I'm pumped. I'm invigorated and I needed that. So thank you.